Shishirada Govinda Dev Ki Jai. While we wait for everything to connect and for everyone to show up, it's always a good idea to start with Jai Radha Madhava. So I thought I'd sing just a little bit of Jai Radha Madhava while we start. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Giri Varadhari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Giri Varadhari Jashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Giri Varadhari Shishirada Madhava Ki Jai Shishirada Govinda Dev Ki Jai. Hi, Hare Krishna. That was a fun intro, but also a great way to test sound and make sure that everybody can hear me. I'm so happy and eager to read Prema Mala for you, with you, for the first time really. I've done recordings, but this is the first time that I've really come on live and said, okay, let's go straight through and read one of these pieces and just see where we land up. Let's see what comes up from whatever we read. And let's see how we can really try and speak to one another, heal with one another, feel with one another, just for half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe the full hour. We'll see how it goes. This book, Prema Mala, just won an award. So you can get it on Amazon. I will be posting links. It's available worldwide. It's also available on ebook. And if you are in a position to get the ebook and not the printed copy, and you think to yourself, am I missing something? The answer is no. I tried to put a lot into the presentation of the ebook. So there are lots of fun surprises in the ebook. And it's the same poems and meditations and prayers and longings. So the same content is there in the ebook, but there are a few added surprises. So it is worth it to get the ebook if that is the only one that you can get. Trust me, it's worth it. So today I'm going to read the piece called Fixed. And it's within the section called Pole Star Prince. And if any of you happen to have the book and you want to grab it and read along, please do. If you don't happen to have the book, there are sections of the book that have longer pieces, like short stories. There are some pieces that sound like essays. There are some pieces that are meditations. So this piece focuses on the short story of Dhruva Maharaj. Dhruva was a 5-year-old boy, and he lived yugas ago. So not just years ago, like millions of years ago. And he begins to encounter certain problems. So for me, it's a great lesson in that the things that we face right now are not new. The problems that we face have been faced by devotees, by bhaktas, by lovers of God, by spiritualists for millenniums. So in reading their stories and in looking at the lessons that they've learned, we can figure out how best to deal with this huge thing called life. So without further ado, this piece is called Fixed. 5-year-old Dhruva looked into the eyes of his father, his younger brother, and his stepmother. There was nothing but quiet in the great hall, and it seemed that not even the heavy curtains hanging from the large latticed windows dared to make a sound in the breeze. Just as all sound had stopped, so had Dhruva's breathing. Deep within the quiet, Dhruva swore he could hear something breaking. Whether it was his previous perception of his life or his heart, he wasn't sure. But he felt shattered. He had to leave quickly. He promised himself that he wouldn't let them see the tears, and he was gone before the first of them could fall. In his mother's chambers, the hot tears coursing down Dhruva's cheeks refused to cease, and he gasped and sobbed, his breath coming in shallow bursts that caused his entire body to shake. Seeing her son so distraught, Queen Suniti finally asked the ministers, guards, and anyone she could find what had happened to make her son so upset. She lifted Dhruva onto her lap, while others recounted poor Dhruva's humiliating experience. Dhruva and his brother Uttam had been with their father, the wise ruler King Uttanapad. Uttam had been lifted onto his father's lap, and Dhruva, eager for the same affection, scrambled to climb up onto his father's lap as well. But the boy was quickly shunned by the king. Taken aback by the sudden rejection of love, Dhruva began to protest, but was silenced by a clear voice ringing out in the room. Dhruva, my dear boy, your attempt is futile. Your desires were doomed to failure, like flower buds plucked too soon. What you desire can never be. You see, you have no claim to the lap of your father. What to speak of the throne? Pity that you were not born my son. Suruchi, the second and favorite wife of the king, looked down at Dhruva from where she stood watching the entire scene. Dhruva couldn't understand what she was saying. All he knew was that he wanted to sit with his father and brother, and he had somehow been denied. He looked down for a moment before her voice pulled his attention once again. Sadly, all hope for you this time around is lost. If you want your father's affection, the throne, any of this that you see, you should go worship the Supreme Lord Vishnu. And on that day, when he stands before you in all of his glory and urges you to ask a boon from him, you should have the desire to give up your life and take another birth from my womb, a mother more fortunate, someone like me. With pride rippling off of her in waves, Suruchi lifted her shoulders up and back, pleased with her own good fortune and drunk on the affection of the king. There was a gleam in her eye, as though the thought of young Dhruva giving up his present body was giving the queen immense joy. Dhruva stood waiting for his father to come to his defense for as long as he could before he ran to the safety of his mother's arms. For a moment, Suniti could only hold her son close to her heart while sobs racked his small body. She was silent for a long while, nearly choked up with her own powerlessness. The truth was that she could do nothing for her son. She would not be the one to ease his pain. Dhruva, she lifted his chin and took in his large, tear-filled eyes that looked so much like her own. I know you are angry. I know. But don't let that anger rule you. Everyone has to suffer the results of their own past misdeeds. We cannot blame this cruelty on anyone other than ourselves. Who knows what impious behavior from any of our past lives has warranted these insults heaped upon both you and me? The unfortunate reality is that you will never be treated like Uttam. I am not the king's favorite. That honor and all the prestige that goes along with it belongs to your mother, Suruchi. As the word mother left her lips, Dhruva's eyes snapped to hers, spitting fire and indignation. She spared him a small, sad smile. Yes, Dhruva, she is still your mother. The queen is right. I cannot help you. As long as you are connected with me, you run the risk of being rejected by your father. I myself have suffered rejection at his hands. But if you connect yourself with the Supreme Lord, you can never be rejected by anyone. Dhruva's countenance began to change. The anger in his eyes dimmed, like a blazing fire dying down to its last embers. He swiped his hands across his face, clearing away countless tears, trying to make sense of what his mother was telling him. Lord Vishnu is the maintainer, the protector, and provider for everyone. Your father, your grandfather Manu, and your great-grandfather Lord Brahma have worshipped him, and they were all granted their positions in life. No one has gotten anything of value without offering him their worship first. If you feel as though you want the rights to your father's lap, I cannot give them to you, but the Supreme Lord can give anyone anything. It is to him that you should speak about your plight. Sparks of hope flared in the boy's eyes. Where can I find him, mother? How can I pray to him? Suniti smiled at her son's determination. Great wise men and seers have journeyed deep within the forest to catch a glimpse of just the effulgence of the Supreme Lord. They have practiced deep meditation with faith and determination just to have his audience. Within her own mind, Suniti paid her respects to the Supreme Lord, who was like a soothing balm on her wounded self-image. She lacked the power to give her son the life that he dreamed of, but she absolutely knew the direction in which to point him. Sliding from the safety of her lap to stand in front of her, she saw the spirited look that adorned Dhruva's beautiful face. He would make an excellent warrior one day. And Suniti smiled with pride as she passed a hand gently over his head, her fingers tangling in his abundant curls. Mother, I am leaving this place. Suniti should have expected those words from her son, but still, it felt as though she'd been struck with a boulder. She met his eyes with her own tearful ones. She knew better than to try and talk him out of a decision once he had made up his mind. Even at the tender age of 5, he was a headstrong Kshatriya. Before her tears could fall very far, his small hands were there smoothing them away. She shook her head a little. She wanted to present 1,000 arguments as to why Dhruva should journey no farther than her lap, but she had already told him that the way to attain all that he wanted was to leave home. It would be useless to try and keep him now. Mother, I will make you proud. I will not return until I have a kingdom greater than my father, grandfather, or even great-grandfathers. Dhruva stood up tall, puffing out his chest with all of the authority that his small body could muster. Suniti gathered Dhruva to her in a crushing hug, holding on to her darling boy for as long as she could. Finally, she wished him luck and released him, praying to every supreme being there was in creation that her son would be safe and that he would return soon. Outside the palace, Dhruva's bravado began to wane. The world was a very big place. Even just his father's kingdom was massive. Where would he start? Mother had said to journey to the forest to find the Lord, but how would he call to him? Which forest was he supposed to go to? And how long would it take him to get there? With numerous thoughts clouding his mind, Dhruva took a deep breath and walked further from the high walls of the palace complex. He was leaving the safety of his parents for the first time. He had just barely been allowed outside the palace gates, and even then never alone. He could feel the pressure of solitude weighing on his small shoulders. He felt the imposing task so deeply that when he heard his name called, he jumped, startled at having another's company. He whirled, eager to see who had been following him. The sage, Narad Muni, stood appraising Dhruva with a look that the boy could not read. The sage was famous. He could travel all over creation at will, and he knew everything. Dhruva calmed, knowing for certain that if anyone could tell him how to achieve his goals, it would be this great wise man. Dhruva pressed his hands together in respect and bowed low in salute to the sage. He rose again after receiving the Muni's blessing for a long life, filled with determination and victory in all of Dhruva's pursuits. Dhruva, my boy, what are you doing out here so far away from the palace all alone? The sage gave Dhruva a kind smile and stepped closer. Dhruva lifted his face to look up at the sage before he answered. I'm going to find the Supreme Lord. My mother told me that he is the only one who is able to help me, so I must find him. Narada nodded wisely. The Supreme Lord is not easy to find. Great yogis and ascetics practice the most severe kinds of meditation for years, just to catch a glimpse of his effulgence. This is no task for a young boy. Why don't you go back home and play? Your mission can be accomplished at some later time in life. Narada smiled at Dhruva, his eyes gentle and protective. Dhruva felt the sting of Mother Suruchi's words rush back all at once, and his eyes fell to the road beneath his feet. He dug the toe of his richly embroidered shoe into the dirt path before him and clenched his teeth so that he wouldn't say anything rude to the sage. Speak freely. Narada's command was enough to free the tight lock that Dhruva had placed on his lips. I need a kingdom. I need a kingdom greater than my father's, my grandfather's, or even my great-grandfather's. His eyes grew larger with each aspiration until they looked like twin moons staring at the sage. Surely there are other ways to achieve a kingdom. Narada was quick with his reply, but Dhruva was equally as prompt. Not for me. Dhruva trained his eyes on the ground, and he refused to meet Narada's clear and knowing gaze. My mother has been insulted, and me along with her. The queen, Suruchi, she said, she said so many horrible things. Perhaps others would be able to find some peace in your advice to wait until I am older, but my heart has been pierced by the queen's words, and I cannot turn back. Dhruva took deep, heavy breaths in an attempt to check his emotions. The sage shook his head, marveling at the small boy. Even at such a young age, his Kshatriya spirit burned so brightly within him that he found it impossible to tolerate anything spoken against him. Narada, easily seeing into the boy's future, stifled a proud smile. Dhruva's lofty words and proud stance were heartwarming, and he could see that Dhruva would indeed become a very powerful person. "O great seer, if you want to help me, then please tell me the correct method for me. I desire the greatest position in all creation, a position which has not even been acquired by my great-grandfather, Lord Brahma, the creator of all the worlds. You are the son of Lord Brahma, and you travel throughout creation at will. Surely you can help me." Behind Dhruva's words, Narada could hear the child's heart. He had been deeply wounded, and that pain still showed in his eyes when he raised them to make his plea. Narada nodded, pleased with Dhruva's determination and faith. "Your mother Suniti is correct. The one who can fulfill all your desires and help you is the Supreme Lord, Vasudeva. If you worship him with your mind completely concentrated on him, then you'll be sure to achieve your goal. For if there is anything in this creation that one desires, the only one who can help them is the Supreme Lord." Dhruva's face brightened, and hope flared in his eyes like a stoked flame. Narada chuckled, since the boy was clearly hungry for much more information than his mother had already given him. Seeing into Dhruva's heart and reading the numerous questions there, the sage desired to give the boy all the answers he desired. "If you go to Madhuvan, on the banks of the Jamuna River, that would be a wonderful place to start your meditation. After bathing in that sacred river and completing the necessary prayers, you should make yourself a seat and sit on it, with your body straight and tall." Narada glanced down at the boy, who was hanging on to his every word. Dhruva seemed to be absorbing the instructions even as quickly as the sage could speak them. Even at the mention of his posture, Dhruva stood up that much taller. "Meditate on the Lord of your heart and serve him all the best that your mind can offer. The Supreme Lord is always ready to give mercy to those who seek him out for shelter. His face is completely filled with bliss, and he has the most beautiful features. His eyes are like two fully bloomed lotus petals. His forehead is broad like a half moon. His smile is charming for the heart, and his eyebrows are incredibly graceful. He is even more beautiful than a host of demigods. He is a complete ocean of mercy. His eyes and lips are both tinged with a reddish hue, the color of lotuses that have been coaxed open by the rising sun. All of his limbs are attractive and youthful, and he is the shelter of all surrendered souls. He is dark like the pre-dawn sky, and his many jewels seem to be like glittering stars in the midnight sky of his deep, swarthy complexion. He has a garland draped around his neck that reaches all the way down to his knees. He has 4 hands, and in them he constantly holds his disc, conch shell, club, and lotus flower. A golden crown sits atop his head with its glorious halo of bluish-black curls that curve and frame his enchanting face. Around his neck hangs the famed Kaustuba jewel, and yellow, silken cloth makes him look as though he is a dark cloud struck through with lightning. This Supreme Lord, Sri Vasudeva, with his tinkling ankle bells, is a joy for the mind to behold, and he is pleasing to see. He enters into the lotus of the heart of the devotee with his two lotus feet that shine with their pearlescent toenails, and he situates himself deep within the core of the living entity. One should meditate with great affection and attachment on the smiling face of this Supreme Personality, who is the greatest well-wisher of everyone, and who always glances on his devotees with absolute love. The mind of one who is fully absorbed in this vision of their eternal beloved very soon becomes filled with the highest happiness and never again wishes for anything else. Their sole desire to never leave that form of the Lord. Narada allowed his eyes to flutter closed, momentarily lost in his vision of the Lord of his heart. He could see his Lord just as clearly as if he had been in his presence, and the feeling was always overwhelming. Pulling himself back to the present, Narada looked down at Dhruva, who was staring at the sage in rapt attention, drinking in his every word and awaiting further instruction. Narada smiled encouragingly, seeing a familiar look in the young boy's eyes. It was the look of a starving heart. He had once had the same hunger to attain the Supreme. Narada bent toward the young boy and looked around them conspiratorially, until Dhruva also looked around, eager to know what the big secret was. Young prince, I shall now teach you the highest secret mantra. I will chant it in your right ear. This wonderful incantation will fulfill your heart's desire. You can perform all of your worship with the strength of this divine mantra. Are you ready? Narada quirked an eyebrow at the young boy and waited until Dhruva, with his beautiful large eyes filled with hope and promise, nodded gravely, with all the seriousness that his 5-year-old form could muster. Cupping his hand near his mouth and leaning toward Dhruva's right ear, Narada chanted the mantra that would allow the boy to access the divine world and the Supreme Lord with it. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. The sage recited the mantra 3 times before he had Dhruva repeat the celestial words back to him. Narada instructed Dhruva to utter the mantra again and again until he was satisfied that the boy had it memorized with the proper intonation and inflection. At the moment, Dhruva's pure determination was carrying him through. He did not yet have the love that would cause spontaneous recitation of that divine mantra, but Narada could see that soon the boy would become unstoppable. With another blessing, Narada sent the prince on his way to Madhuvan. He made a promise to Queen Suniti that he would personally watch over him, although he knew that Dhruva would need no further guidance or protection. Now he was under the care of the Supreme Lord himself. Dhruva circumambulated the sage with great reverence before starting off toward Madhuvan forest, his hands still clasped together, while he earnestly murmured his newly acquired mantra. By the will of divine arrangement, Dhruva arrived in the forest of Madhuvan not long after he set out on his journey. He fasted that evening and settled beneath a large tree, making himself a small resting place on the ground, padded by dust which felt almost as soft as his velvet bedsheets at home. Dhruva filled his hands with the dust that the Lord himself had walked across, and with a joyous smile watched as it slipped through his small fingers. Here was where he would perform the biggest task of his life thus far. He would start the next day. For now, he allowed himself the evening to rest. As the sun shone in the east, so did Dhruva, his willpower radiating from him like the rays of the sun that brightened the morning sky. After bathing in the dark, cool waters of the Jamuna, he centered his mind on the form of Lord Vasudeva, just as Narada Muni had instructed him to do. With a deep, grounding breath, he began to recite his mantra. Over and over again, he recited the mantra that would soon give the young boy the strength to do the impossible. Fasting for 3 days at a time during the first month, the days passed quickly as Dhruva thought about Lord Vasudeva and the vision that Narada had planted within his mind. In the second month, he was eating every 6 days, and the outside world faded away more and more for him. His internal world with Lord Vasudeva was everything. The sage had instructed that within his mind, Dhruva could offer Lord Vasudeva all kinds of service, even those things that were impossible for him to accomplish within the confines of his new forest dwelling. The weather changed, the rains came, but Dhruva remained steady. By the third month, Dhruva was only drinking water every 9 days. His mantra had become all the sustenance he required. The more he offered to Lord Vasudeva in his mind, the more satisfied he felt. Dhruva had come to the forest with thoughts of a kingdom, but now he found himself hardly thinking of anything outside of Lord Vasudeva. In the fourth month, Dhruva was becoming a master at controlling his life air. He no longer ate or drank, but he felt no less weakened than the first day he had begun his austerities. In fact, he hardly felt as though he were performing austerities at all. This was all for the pleasure of his supreme Lord Vasudeva, the one with the smiling face and the eyes filled with love, the one who looked back at him as Dhruva meditated for hours on end. As Dhruva entered the 5th month of performing intense austerities, thinking about Lord Vasudeva, he stood, immovable as a mountain, tall as a pillar, on 1 foot. Completely absorbed in the Lord, he could see absolutely nothing else. The outside world was lost to him as he served the Lord through his remembrance. As Dhruva meditated on Vasudeva, the protector of all the worlds and the shelter of all the elements, all of the universal planetary systems began to tremble with the force of his spiritual strength. As Dhruva stood on 1 foot, his big toe pressed into the soft dust of Madhuvan, but the force of his yogic power pushed the entire earth downward. The great earth, which is able to bear any heavy thing, rocked and sunk like a boat shifted by the weight of a great elephant. So powerful was the young Prince Dhruva. Tremors coursed through the planet in all directions and were felt throughout all creation. At that moment, Dhruva, in complete control of his mind and totally focused on Lord Vasudeva, drew in a deep breath and then ceased breathing altogether. He had systematically cut down all of his external functions of his body during the course of his meditation, and now finally, he had become so adept at his yogic meditation that he no longer needed the outgoing circulation of air. When Dhruva took in that last inhale of breath, so did the entirety of creation. Breathless, confused and troubled, the Devas, the great celestials in charge of all creation, approached the Supreme Lord Vishnu. "My Lord, we are desperate for your help. Never before have we been rendered helpless by any other power of austerity. What has happened to us? We cannot breathe, and we are feeling such intense pressure. The universe is shaking, and it feels as though the different planes of the universe may be thrown out of orbit. What is the cause of our discomfort? If not for you, we have no other shelter. You are our only Lord. The confused pleas of the Devas caused the Lord Vishnu to smile compassionately. Because he was so absorbed in Vasudev, the soul of all souls, Dhruva's own soul and that of Lord Vasudev's were intertwined and inextricably linked. When Dhruva stopped breathing, because of Dhruva's connection with the Lord, the entire creation could not breathe. Just as if one pleases Lord Vasudev, the entirety of creation is automatically pleased. Lord Vishnu began to explain the entire story to the Devas, his smile reflecting the pride he felt at the fixed nature of Dhruva's austerity and service. But Lord Vishnu understood that for the good of the universe, Dhruva's austerity had to reach its culmination. My dear Devas, do not fear. Please return to your respective territories in peace. I will put an end to the boy's penance and free you all from your confusion. This young Dhruva has done the impossible. He has concentrated his mind so completely on me that because of him, you have all become breathless. I will go and answer the call of my devotee. Lord Vishnu raised the palm of his right hand, instilling within them fearlessness and an overwhelming confidence that was only his to impart. With their faith firmly situated in Lord Vishnu, the Devas returned to their homes to see what glorious action Lord Vishnu would take next. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Dhruva felt the familiar fluttering in his heart as he raised his eyes to look into the face of Lord Vasudev. Narada had been right. The Lord's face was beautiful to behold, and Dhruva often forgot everything else as he stared at him. His silken dhoti, wrapped around his hips, was a striking golden color, and the Lord's body was the color of night. Vasudev smiled down at Dhruva, his deep brown eyes twinkling, and a breathy laugh escaped the boy. Dhruva went to pick flowers from the many bushes around the area, just as Nard Muni had instructed him to do. He had been doing this for Lord Vasudev every day diligently, until it felt less like something Dhruva was supposed to do, and more like something he wanted to do. This was his favorite time. When he offered the flowers to Vasudev, Dhruva immediately felt an overwhelming surge of love. Even more blissful was the indescribable look on the Lord's face as he accepted Dhruva's love. With his small hands filled with jasmine flowers, Dhruva walked carefully back to where Lord Vasudev stood waiting for him. He was always so patient. It didn't matter how long it took Dhruva to gather all the flowers or bring water from the Jamuna to wash the Lord's feet. He was always patiently waiting. Dhruva's heart sped up with each step that he took closer to his Lord. By the time he reached the tree that served as a canopy for the Lord, Dhruva's hands were trembling. He closed his eyes and offered a prayer from the depths of his heart. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Dhruva knelt down and felt the velvet sands of Madhuvan beneath his knees. He formed a spout from his joined palms and gently poured the jasmine buds onto the lotus feet of the Lord. Dhruva reached down, bowing his head low, now coming to his most favorite part. He looked forward to the moment when he touched the Lord's tender feet with his hands and his forehead. For just a moment, Dhruva would rest his forehead on Lord Vasudev's feet, and Dhruva would know that there was nowhere else he would ever long to be. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Dhruva could smell the aroma of jasmine before his fingers felt them. He brought his forehead down, ready for the experience of touching Lord Vasudev. The experience always brought him the utmost feeling of protection and shelter. His heart hammered in his chest, and Dhruva pressed his forehead to the ground until he felt the dust of Madhuvan beneath him. Om Namo Bhagavate. Dhruva jerked up. This was all wrong. He should have felt the incomparable sensation of the lotus feet of Vasudeva beneath his forehead. The space around him was empty. The jasmine flowers were still there, but they looked strangely wilted, as though they too felt the absence of the Lord immediately. The forest of Madhuvan was still there. The tree was still there. The sounds of the Jamuna rushing by was still there in the background. But Vasudeva, who made the entire scene make sense, the one who gave it life, was gone. Gone. Vasudeva? Dhruva called, looking around him. He looked behind the tree, momentarily thinking that perhaps his lord was hiding from him. Dhruva scrubbed at his eyes with his hands, wondering if perhaps maybe his vision was faulty. Where could the lord have gone? Vasudeva? His cry echoed around him with no answer. This was his greatest fear, his worst nightmare. Vasudeva! Dhruva's eyes opened. He was gasping for air, tears streaming down his face. His mouth gaped open, prepared to call out for the Lord again. But he found himself face to face with Lord Vasudeva. The relief Dhruva felt was paramount, until he realized that he was no longer in meditation. A sound of wonder escaped him as he reached out to touch Vasudeva, to see if he was really, truly real. His effulgence lit up Madhuvan forest, and he seemed even more beautiful than he had when Dhruva saw him in meditation. As Dhruva's fingers brushed against the end of an impossibly soft sash, he collapsed at the feet of the Lord. Dhruva's eyes went large and round as he finally looked up from his place on the ground. He drank in the sight of Lord Vasudeva just as he had in his meditation. He could feel the tears coursing down his cheeks, and he longed to wash the Lord's feet with them. His breathing came in halting, shallow gasps, and he looked on the feet that he had loved resting beside in his dreams. He wanted to throw himself at Lord Vasudeva's feet. He wanted to wrap his arms around them and ask never to be separated from him again. He wanted to press his face to them until they were all that Dhruva would ever know. That one moment without Lord Vasudeva had felt like the most bereft existence. Dhruva never wanted to experience another moment without him ever again. Dhruva opened and closed his mouth again and again. He knew he probably did not look like a dignified prince as he struggled to find his words. He had been worshipping Lord Vasudeva all this time, and now, when he finally had the Lord before him, he could say nothing. His mind had lost all thoughts other than the Lord. He had forgotten all names other than Lord Vasudeva's. There was nothing outside of the Lord, and there would never be anything else beside him. Lord Vasudeva, bathed in a wondrous golden glow, reached out with his conch shell in hand and touched the smooth conch to the top of Dhruva's head. Dhruva bowed his head to accept the touch of Lord Vasudeva, and as the celebrated conch touched him, thoughts, words, and prayers came flowing back to him, and Dhruva breathed deep, the feeling of Lord Vasudeva's mercy filling every inch of his being. With his voice faltering, with the emotion surging within his heart, Dhruva finally spoke. "Oh, my all-powerful Lord, you have entered deep into the chambers of my heart and have enlivened all of my senses, awakening me as though I had been in a deep slumber. You have enthused my very life force. I offer my respects unto you, my unforgettable Lord. Although you enter into this material creation as the Supreme Person, you, out of your own kindness, also enter into the heart of every living entity as the Supersoul and their supreme friend and benefactor. Seeing you, I have forgotten anything else I previously thought to be true. You are the only truth. It is you who gave life to Lord Brahma, and endowed him with his power to create, and his kingdom of Brahma Loka. It is you alone who at the end of each creation dissolves this entire manifested universe within your belly. It is only you who rests upon the serpent bed, you who are the cause of all causes. You are the witness of all, and you are the maintainer of the entire universe, even though you stand apart from it all. You remain unchanged, despite the countless changes of creation, and you are the ruler and the guardian of material nature. I can understand all this now, as I behold this supreme form, which even deep in my meditation, I had never seen before. Dhruva thought back to his days blissfully merged in his meditation, and he knew for certain that the joy that he felt was nothing compared to how he felt now. He knew within his heart that there was no difference between the form of Vasudeva that he saw in his meditation and the form that he was gazing unblinkingly at now. But he could feel the direct presence of Lord Vasudeva with every atom. He felt somehow pulled toward this beautiful vision of the Lord, as though Lord Vasudeva was a magnet and Dhruva was nothing more than an insignificant metal shaving, forever lost in this magnetic force field. Those like me, who have come to you seeking any kind of material pleasure, are no more than fools. Dhruva bent his head, his voice choked with the shame he felt before he rushed on, encouraged by the sight of the glittering rings on the toes of his beloved Lord. My Lord, please, let me always find those fortunate souls who are devoted to you. Let me spend my time with them. Let me find out the truth about you from them. The happiness derived from meditating upon your lotus feet or hearing about you far exceeds any other pleasure that could ever be obtained or described. My Lord Vasudeva, bless me so that I might be so fortunate as to always have the shelter of those who are committed to you, constantly engaged in your loving service, just as the waves of a great river constantly flow. By somehow engaging in your beautiful service, I know that I will come to truly understand the goal of this life of mine, for I find myself becoming obsessed with hearing about your glories, which are ever existing. Dhruva smiled up at the gorgeous, calm face of Lord Vasudeva, who ever patiently listened to his prayers. Lord Vasudeva, whose merciful smile never faltered, and whose magnificent glance never strayed from Dhruva's face, nodded almost imperceptibly. Dhruva was absolutely enamored by him. You are the supreme abode of all wishes and benedictions. One who finds the treasure of service to you no longer has anything else to hope for. He is never lacking anything, and no other desire resides within his heart. Worshipping your lotus feet is better than becoming king. It is better than any kingdom anywhere. Oh, my lord. Dhruva's words broke off as he gazed longingly at the lotus feet of Lord Vasudeva. He remembered for a moment the feeling of having lost him again, and the emotions that came creeping back in were terrible. Dhruva knew that he wanted nothing else but to be with his dear lord. In a voice that stole the hair-raising magnificence from thunder and quieted every other noise in the entire Madhuvan forest, Lord Vasudeva finally spoke to Dhruva. His beautiful lips raised in a smile, showing rows of pearlescent perfect teeth, and one eyebrow rose as he glanced down at Dhruva knowingly. And what of your desires, my dear prince? Dhruva shook his head quickly and lowered his gaze. I came to you like a poor man, asking for mere husks of rice. I came to you, searching after shards of broken glass, but you have given me the priceless jewel of your love. How could I ever want anything else? I want nothing. Dhruva clasped his hands together, his heart squeezing painfully at the thought that he had ever wanted anything other than the love of his Lord. A rumbling laugh issued from the Lord's deep in the Lord's chest, and Dhruva's eyes, filled with awe and adoration, lifted once again to Vasudev's face. All good fortune will be yours, my boy. There exists a glittering planet situated above any other planet within the universe. It is worshipped by every other planet as the best of all abodes. This planet is called the Pole Star. This planet will continue to exist even after the dissolution of the entire creation. All the luminaries in the sky, the planets of all solar systems, the innumerable stars, and all auspiciousness revolve around this planet like ornaments around the king of gems. This planet shall be yours. It shall be a kingdom unlike any other, one greater than that of your father, King Uttanapad, or your great-grandfather, Lord Brahma. Not only will you rule your father's kingdom, but you will rule the entirety of earth for thousands of years, and yet you will never, ever grow old. You will be able to perform any sacrifice successfully, and you will be able to give any charity. And I bless you that you will never, at any moment in your entire existence, forget me. After your rule, both here on the earth and in the pole star, you shall return to my eternal abode, after which you will never be separated from me ever again. Vasudev raised one of his hands in blessing, and Dhruva dragged in a shaky breath. He felt unworthy of all that he had been given, and could only meet his Lord's words with silent, humbled gratitude. Dhruva returned home to his father, who had been distraught when Dhruva left home, and had since recognized the complete error of his ways. His stepmother Suruchi too realized that she had allowed her pride to transform her into a volatile version of herself. Dhruva's mother Suniti observed her son with pride as he returned home successful from the most powerful austerities the world had ever seen. Dhruva himself returned home with a heavy heart, saddened by the fact that he had ever thought to worship his Lord with some material favor in mind. He had executed loving service to the Lord with the way a merchant would deal with customers. The Lord was not his to command or order, and yet Lord Vasudev had shown him all kindness and causeless mercy. Dhruva vowed that he would never forget what he had learned, and armed with the blessing of Lord Vasudev, Dhruva knew that he would never forget his dearmost friend. Indeed, Dhruva Maharaj ki jai. Shri Krishna Bhagavan ki jai. This story of Dhruva brings up for me the question of how many times have we been told by someone that we are not fit to achieve all that we know we can be? How many times have we been told by outside forces we are not enough? We will never be enough. We are not worthy. We should not have the desire to succeed. We should not have these aspirations. How many times are we coerced into believing someone else's story about ourselves? Dhruva's name means fixed and determined. And Dhruva was the kind of boy who was not going to allow someone else's story of him to affect what he could achieve in his life. As a Kshatriya, as a warrior, he decided that he would achieve the best kingdom no matter what. And even though he went to the Lord seeking a kingdom, he received so much more than that. And Srimad Bhagavatam tells us that we should learn these stories of our great teachers we should learn these pastimes and prayers, because the benediction is for one who recites these prayers, for one who listens to these prayers, for one who hears them, remembers them. They often wind up achieving the same blessings that are given to those in these stories. So just as Dhruva attained so much more than he had set out for, I encourage us all to take shelter of our supreme dearmost friend and never, ever listen to someone else's story about who you can become, who you can be. We are empowered. We are completely powered by our Supreme Lord, by divinity, by our dearmost friend. There is absolutely nothing that is impossible for us to achieve. Dhruva was only 5, and he achieved so much. Imagine what our determination, what our patience, what our fixed hearts can bring up. And the more that we love our dearmost friend, the more our dearmost friend will come and reciprocate that love. I thank you all so much for joining me. I want to say a quick hello to all my friends who joined me. Thank you. I hope that this becomes a really regular thing, especially since there are so many more lessons and passages and poems, even within this section about Dhruva, that we could read and just talk about. So hopefully I will be back very, very soon. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for responding with all the hearts. Thank you all for responding with all the prayers and good wishes. Thank you for all the comments. I agree that it did feel like we all got transported. And we all have the same magical incantation. It's been given to us all. All we have to do is call upon the power of the holy names and just look at what we can achieve. With that said, I will see you all again next time. Shri Radha Govinda Dev Ki Jai. Thank you.